I really don't think we should be regulated by the government. Anna asks, no one wants censorship. We want to be free to criticize, especially those in power online. What's the balanced approach to allow people their free speech? And, for a private company which is allowed to present whatever content it wants that, is legal, including, I guess, categories of speech which we're all concerned about, which is harmful but legal. Harry, maybe have you thought about that?
The free speech argument is somewhat a distraction from the main problem. That's certainly what I've noticed over the last 6 months.
The free speech argument is somewhat a distraction
because it's kind of become like a bit of a digital dictatorship. And from my perspective, looking for the solutions, I really feel as though we have to invest in and support professional, honest journalists who respect and uphold the values of journalism, not the pirates with the press cards who have hijacked the most powerful industry, the freest industry in the world. Real journalists have the power and the will to tackle racism, misogyny, lies, all of it from within their own system. So what I would love to see is a movement for journalists to expose the unethical, the immoral, and dishonest amongst them.
And any outlet should take responsibility for what they write. I just get a little nervous when I hear about people saying, all due respect, Harry, that who's a journalist and who's not. All due respect, Harry, that who's a journalist and who's not. But I want to ask this before we go. Let's
This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. How about we take a trip down memory lane and revisit this interview with Renee DiResta, Rashad Robinson, and Prince Harry with Wired magazine. There is a good reason for why this interview is now deeply buried on the interwebs. Now, this interview was back in November of 2021 when not many people had been paying attention to Harry and Meghan here in the United States. But I think it's worth us looking at this video again because back then, nobody was paying attention. But now we are. And now you'll understand why this video is likely to be a problem now.
Good afternoon. Wired grew up with the internet, appearing just before the boom started in the mid-1990s. The optimism then was palpable, especially in the belief that this new medium would unleash a resonance of free and constructive speech, providing a microphone to those who have previously been unheard. A quarter century later, we have something unexpected and unwelcome. The internet, in particular, internet of social media, is an amplifier of lies. Some of those empowered voices are deliberately causing mayhem and harm, filling a vacuum where some of our leaders won't even speak out for truth. Feed algorithms and recommendation engines are prioritizing the worst speech. And the response by the major platforms, no matter what they call themselves, is anemic and self-serving. This, even when their own documents show that they know the extent of the problem. To be fair, it's a pretty tough problem to solve, but fortunately, we have 3 guests here who will resolve everything over the next 30 minutes and even have some time to take some questions before we let you go. So I want to welcome Renee DiResta, Rashad Robinson, and Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex. Welcome to Rewired. Now, I want to start with Renee, who has been studying for years how misinformation works. Renee, can you outline where we are now with misinformation and tell us maybe to what extent companies like Facebook and Twitter are culpable?
Well, misinformation has always existed. I think it's really important to keep that in mind. What's different now is the way in which it spreads, the speed at which it spreads, and the way in which every individual person participates in moving information from their community into other communities. So one of the really key challenges facing us is that there are things that are false and misleading that are inadvertently spread by people who are sincerely well-meaning. They want to help inform their communities. And so what we're struggling with is this challenge between everyone having a voice and the really fantastic things that that's enabled, and balancing that against the challenge of sometimes false and misleading information that's truly harmful that goes viral and reaches people nonetheless. One of the challenges that we've seen over the last 4 to 5 years is the construction of what I call bespoke realities, places where people tend to congregate with those who are very, very like-minded. They're sharing media because they trust particular media sources, but more importantly, they really actively distrust people on the outside. And so we're seeing kind of a fragmentation in our society as people spend more and more time in echo chambers where the information within one is not the same as the information in another. And social media's sorting functions, recommendations, curation have really exacerbated that problem. And now we're left struggling to figure out what to do about it.
Yeah, yeah. You refer to it as amplaganda as a term. I don't know if did you coin that? I mean, what is that?
Well, I did, but what I was trying to convey was this idea that propaganda is actually very, very old, right? And misinformation is very, very old. So how do we think about what's new today? How do we think about the affordances that social media has given us, each of us, to serve as content creators, to serve as content disseminators, and the environment that we live in where by clicking like, by clicking share, by retweeting someone, by amplifying the content that we see, we are contributing to spreading messages that are important to us. And there's an interesting dynamic there. It used to be that messages and narratives were created very much from the top down. There was central control. A lot of the times the narratives were false. They were coming from governments.
A lot of the times the narratives were false. They were coming from governments.
So this question that faces us now is how do we balance this freedom that we're given through the affordances of being able to create and share, but there's no commensurate responsibility that comes with those things. The norms that have developed around them are not necessarily healthy and encouraging amplification of pro-social content. Instead, it's amplifying the things that are most likely to outrage us because that's the kind of content that's being pushed into our feed.
Mm-hmm. So, Rashad, you focused on misinformation in a social justice context. You were a leader for Stop Hate for Profit, the campaign last year. Is that message resonating? Do you find that that's catching on with folks?
Yeah, I feel that people experience a world in which these platforms are creating real harm. Look at January 6th. Look at sort of all the things that we've learned and knew at the time about the ways in which information on the platforms were creating all sorts of challenges during the uprisings of 2020. The interest of some in using the platforms and the vehicles of the platforms to advance voter suppression techniques. The fact of the matter is inequality, injustice, all of these things are not unfortunate, like a car accident. It is part of design. And, communities of color, those who are oppressed, have always used the tools of the time to. It is part of design. And, communities of color, those who are oppressed, have always used the tools of the time to
be able to drive a message. I think of the abolitionist Frederick Douglass, who was a great newspaper man. I think about Ida B. Wells and the stories that she brought forth about lynching and exposing that. The technology of the time of radio, a radio station above Martin Luther King Jr.'s office in Atlanta, where he could tap the ceiling with a broom and they would lower the microphone and he could get on and spread it. What we have now in so many ways is a set of self-regulated companies. And self-regulated companies are unregulated companies. And the incentive structures that drive so many of the decisions consistently put our communities in harm's way because the people in charge will always choose growth and profit over safety, integrity, and security. And so to the extent, the reason why social justice is so important, that without sort of the focus of racial and gender justice, without actually driving our changes through a lens of how the people most impacted are going to be able to not only see relief, less harm, but will also be able to experience these platforms and experience joy and hope and connection until we actually wire our sort of advocacy, our policymaking through that lens. What we will oftentimes is get solutions that fall far short of addressing the real problems. And that is why ensuring that part of this work is always sort of inclusive of amplifying, engaging, and centering the voices of those most impacted.
All right. Well, speaking of self-regulation, literally just minutes before we started this session, Facebook, or the company formerly known as Facebook, it's calling itself Meta now, announced that beginning in January, it's not going to target ads based on people's interactions with content regarding race, health, religion, and many other categories. Now, they really didn't break it down. I really haven't time to go through this. And I know that they didn't brief you, Rashad, but could this be a difference maker in any way?
No. I think that on a day-to-day basis, there's not much that Facebook is going to do and that we can count on and trust Facebook to do that's going to make much of a difference beyond a new set of infrastructure and a new set of incentive structures and a new set of rules. This is not to say that Facebook won't, announce new policies that then a couple of months later they decide not to enforce. I have been part of real work with Facebook over the years in the rooms to get them to actually implement policies, only to watch them not enforce them when powerful people had violated them, including our former president and others.
Including our former president and others.
And being across the table and watching them make excuses. And so the announcement of a new set of policies from a company that time and time again refuses to actually enforce their policies is exactly part of the problem. Would we let car companies simply tell us their seatbelts worked? And when we see time and time again that they don't work, would we have an apparatus to hold them accountable, or we let them continue to make announcements? Would we trust the people who put food in our grocery stores to simply police themselves and decide whether or not our food is healthy? These misinformation and disinformation, information disorder, is a problem that affects every aspect of American life. It makes sort of issues around health more challenging. It makes issues around our democracy more challenging. It makes our ability to come together more challenging.
Misinformation, disinformation, hate speech labels are always used by the people in power to censor their critics.
And we can no longer accept the sort of announcements of billionaires who have time and time again proven themselves to be not only irresponsible, but much more willing to put their bottom line over the health, dignity, respect, and joy of all of us in this country and beyond.
Okay. Well, Harry, maybe you could help humanize this for us. But first, I want to share something that happened. A little over a week ago, we announced that you would be part of this panel. And I was tagged in the Twitter. Wired put out one tweet about it. And ever since then, my Twitter, my notifications have blown up. Harry haters have, jumped in there, saying all sorts of things, and then some of your supporters got on there. There's a wild brawl going on there, and that's all I see when I look at Twitter now.
You see, and here's the perfect example of how criticism turns into, oh, they're haters. When you go through the comments of this post, it's nothing like what he's trying to make it sound like, as if people were being nasty. No. All they were doing was calling Prince Harry out for being one of the super spreaders of misinformation. This interview was done in November 2021 after the Oprah sit-down lie fest. So, of course, people were coming out and saying, oh, this destroys credibility because Harry himself and his wife were spreading nothing but misinformation and disinformation.
Maybe a little glimpse into your life, but I know that in the past few years, you've been looking into some of the nuts and bolts of this, and maybe it's a problem you've had all your life, but maybe talk a little bit about your journey into this.
Well, Stephen, first of all, I'm really sorry that's happened to you. I'm sorry that I was,
I'll get through it.
the cause of that. It's your fault for inviting me onto this panel. Look, first off, I've said this before and I'll say it again. Misinformation is a global humanitarian crisis.
It's a crisis that Harry and his wife, as well as the rest of these folks, have created for us in order to drive the solution of implementing censorship. At no point during this interview does Harry talk about online child safety. From the very beginning, with these people, it was always about people making money off of things that they didn't agree with, which they categorized as so-called hate. And from Harry's position, he sees the media in general just as being corrupt because of his experience with the British press. Meanwhile, it was his wife that was causing a lot of the disruption online due to the stories that she was putting out there or leaking.
As you quite rightly pointed out, I felt it personally over the years, and I'm now watching it happen globally, affecting everyone, not just America, literally everyone around the world. And I guess the scariest part about it is you don't need to be online to be affected by this. But I think Renee mentioned this as well. It's important to recognize that this problem, it did not originate on social media, and you do not need to be online to be affected, as I said. I learned from a very early age that the incentives of publishing are not necessarily aligned with the incentives of truth. My experience, I guess, has been more pre-social media around the UK press, who sadly conflate profit with purpose and news with entertainment. And they don't report the news, they create it. And they've successfully turned fact-based news into opinion-based gossip with devastating consequences for the country. So I know the story all too well. I lost my mother to this self-manufactured rabidness, and obviously I'm determined not to lose the mother to my children to the same thing. And when I said in the mental health series many months ago that they won't stop until she's dead, that was I guess more of a warning, not a challenge. And look, the scale of misinformation now is terrifying. No one's safe from it. No one is protected from it. You can't hide from it. And we continue to see lives ruined, families destroyed. In one single household, you can have 3 or 4 versions of reality when it comes to truth and fact.
You see, and this is the dangerous problem with these people, because they want one source of truth, and others who think differently is just simply unacceptable because they don't like that they can't control that thought and that information.
And this, basically, in other words, what I'm saying is, this isn't a case of, oh, this could happen to you. This is already happening to you. And we can all feed into it if we're not aware of it. But if we're aware of it, if we're aware of our digital diet, what we consume every single day, then perhaps we'd be more conscious about what we pass on, what we don't, what we're actually consuming, and the fact that it is actually affecting the way that we think.
Again, this goes back to them controlling what information you can see. This so-called digital diet. They want to be the ones to tell you what is healthy to consume, like what they did during COVID and the irreversible harm and damage that was caused due to suppressing information.
And my experience has taught me that today's misinformation is tomorrow's truth. And we have seen it time and time again. I always like to point out, everything the government told us about COVID turned out to be wrong.
You're absolutely right that, misinformation, and, as Renee also said, has been around for quite a while. The tabloids have been around for over 100 years. But I'm wondering whether social media has introduced the new and, more malicious edge to this. Just a month ago, a report by Sentinel, a company that analyzes tweets, found that a very small number of anti-Meghan and Harry accounts were responsible for a huge percentage of the hateful content about you on Twitter. I know you don't have a Twitter account, but do you think that we should all delete?
All right, so let's pause here for a second. The first targeted campaign that Harry and Meghan executed onto innocent, unsuspecting people was in October of 2021, where Christopher Boozy and the Sussex Squad terrorist organization got together and created this false report. Little did we know at the time, this report was being created to be used in this campaign to push U.S. government policy reform to erode the First Amendment.
No, I'm not on social media. We're not on social media. And until things change, that'll remain the same. But, look, Stephen, as you know, and everybody knows here, we've been led to believe that this challenge is too big to fix. It's too big to solve. What I've learned over the last 6 months as part of the Aspen Commission is that simply isn't true. Just as much as a virus, there are super spreaders to monitor and contain. And even the word super spreader has just been added to the dictionary, I think, just last week. And for good reason. Look, as you point out, we know that a small group of accounts are allowed to create a huge amount of chaos online and destruction. and without any consequence whatsoever. Now more than ever, people are susceptible and I believe vulnerable to persuasion, desperate to be part of something, wanting to believe in something. So when it comes to the media, I mean social media and mainstream media, parts of mainstream media, people are being enlisted. And as you say, thanks to yet another independent report, let's pull up some stats here just so I get it right. More than 70% of the hate speech about my wife on Twitter could be traced to fewer than 50 accounts.
Now, the same day that Harry did this interview with Wired, Bot Sentinel released another report going after British journalists. This cyberbully for hire went after Angela Levin, Richard Eden, Emily Andrews, Victoria Arbiter, Russell Myers, and a few others, but no mention of Jack Royston from Newsweek, Smelly Hall from BuzzFeed, and Meghan's lapdog, Omid Scobie.
Perhaps the most troubling part of this is the number of British journalists interacting with and amplifying the hate and the lies, but they regurgitate these lies as truth. So, in fact, the term, and maybe people know this, maybe they don't, but the term Megxit was or is a misogynistic term. And it was created by a troll, amplified by royal correspondence, and it grew and grew and grew onto mainstream media. But it began with a troll.
And that, my friends, is one of the biggest lies that Harry and Meghan have told. You see, Megxit was not started by a troll. Many people think that Megxit became a term when Harry and Meghan announced that they were leaving the royal family, essentially quitting their job and moving to America. I think many of us have seen this New York Post cover when it happened, but this wasn't the first time that Megxit had been used. Back in January 2020, that's when this term became globally recognized. But you see, this term Megxit was already seen on the cover of a mainstream media newspaper. October of 2018, Metro had plastered Megxit across its front pages when Meghan announced her pregnancy. Do you see anything racist or misogynistic over this? Yes, Harry is correct in saying that the term came from one person, but this person was not a troll. Coined by a British man in Birmingham. On November 27, 2017, the day that Harry and Meghan got engaged, Ray Bradnock had coined the term. Because at that time, Brexit was a big topic. This account was not a Meghan and Harry follower. This account didn't care about the royals. This account cared about Brexit and what was happening in the UK. And at that time, you couldn't avoid not talking about Harry and Meghan's engagement. There was nothing racist or misogynistic about this. The Megxit community actually started leading up to the wedding when there were just a small group of people who were simply not buying Meghan's act and couldn't put their finger on it, but they knew that Meghan was promoting toxic feminism that did not fit in line with British values or the monarchy. And they saw her for what she was, an opportunist. There was nothing racist or sexist or discriminatory. There were just some people that didn't like her. And the issue that Harry and Meghan had were like-minded people discovering one another to validate and confirm their sentiment and feelings. Much like the COVID situation, they didn't want people who were experiencing injuries to voice that, as well as get together with other people who had experienced injuries out of fear that people were going to have vaccine hesitancy. And look at the harm that they did by holding back that information and not allowing people to know that there is this risk.
On Facebook itself, a dozen accounts are responsible for over 65%. I think it is, of totally made up and harmful COVID misinformation, which can reach into the billions of people. And yet they're still there. And for climate denials, a report just last week, I think, basically estimated that another 69%, notice the similarities between 69, 70, 75%. So the vast majority of information was driven by just 10 accounts in the US and Russia alone. And then
now, the report that Harry is talking about is referring to a report that the Center for Countering Digital Hate, otherwise known as the CCDH, had fabricated. Now, the reason why I'm pointing this out is to show you that Harry and Meghan's alignment with the CCDH goes all the way back to the very beginning. This is the organization that had put Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on a blacklist. This is the organization that was heavily aligned with the Biden administration to put in a framework to censor Americans. And this is the same organization that has its roots and foundation with the Labour Party in the UK government. The same people that were helping to interfere with the 2024 election.
Let's not leave out YouTube. YouTube, in one report alone, more than, I think, 70% of videos were in violation of YouTube's own policies on misinformation. And worse, they came to the users via the recommendation tool within YouTube's own algorithm versus anything that the user was actually searching for.
And it's because of this sentiment Harry and Meghan have, they had Google de-rank our channels, meaning our channels are no longer being recommended to anyone. I used to get recommendations. Now I never get recommendations on any royal channels. But YouTube has no problem recommending CNN, MSNBC, NBC, ABC, even though I have stated time and time again that I'm not interested in the fake news and propaganda that's being pushed.
So right here, what I've just said is just how a few can have a devastating impact on the masses if not dealt with responsibly. And it shows really that it can be stopped. But ultimately, they don't want to stop it because it affects their bottom line.
Harry and Meghan are bold-faced liars. They were setting up this narrative to come over to the United States to drive this agenda. Beginning in 2019 was really setting the stage in creating the optics that Meghan and Harry had all these trolls going after them. But really, it was to silence dissent on the questioning of Meghan's moon bump. And the palace was 100% complicit in censoring and silencing voices. I'm not saying the royal family, I'm saying the institution. The people that worked for Harry and Meghan were behind a lot of the censorship. They also were behind the media campaign of the trolling of Meghan. Now remember, during that time in 2019, Sarah Latham, who was Hillary Clinton's former media campaign manager, was now doing communications for Harry and Meghan. On March 4, 2019, around the same time Sarah Latham had joined the Sussexes, the royal website updated with these brand new social media community guidelines as a result of Meghan Markle bitching and complaining about people questioning her moon bump. I'd like to remind everyone that the palace did a lot to silence dissent, not only erasing comments under their own social media platform pages, but also elsewhere on other people's pages. These people, like James Holt, had direct contact with these social media platforms, especially with Facebook, because of Nick Clegg being over there. But in any case, this fabricated campaign began because 3 days later, Max Forster from CNN does this report that really kicks off the whole narrative. I'm going to talk about this report in part 2 because that's where we'll get into the origins of the Sussex Terror Squad. That's a video you definitely don't want to miss. So make sure that you are subscribed to the channel so you're notified, because I will drop that shortly after I drop this one.
Have you ever had a chance to present your case to the leaders of these companies, Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey?
No, not directly, not personally. Jack and I were emailing each other prior to January the 6th, where I warned him that his platform was allowing a coup to be staged. That email was sent the day before, and then it happened, and I haven't heard from him since.
Well, what would you say to Mark Zuckerberg if you had a chance?
I think first off would be a conversation in private, but mainly from my perspective, what I really worry about is the internet. The internet's being defined by hate, division, and lies. That can't be right. Especially for anyone who has children. We're allowing this future to be defined by the very here and now, by exactly that, which is greed and profit and growth.
Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan are the ones who are contributing to this hate by launching this military-grade censorship operation, unleashing information warfare onto innocent, unsuspecting people. You see all those trolls and bots, the bots that are talking about Meghan Markle negatively. I'll bet you money that Harry and Meghan are behind some of those to make it look like, oh, Megxit has been attacking her. This is all to fit into the narrative that had been seeded back in 2019, and you'll see all of that in part 2 of my next video.
I would hope that as human beings, as individuals, with the ability of choice and decision making, that they would worry more about people now, the safety of people, but also what this means for the internet, the free internet, but also what it means for the next generation and the generation after that, and that, and that, and that.
So you mentioned the Aspen Commission on Misinformation Disorder, which sounds like something from a Don DeLillo novel, actually. But so last summer, this commission, it's full of experts. All three of you seem to have an involvement in it, and other people involved in analytics and security and social policy. Last summer, released sort of an interim report. Talking about his priorities, which seem pretty unobjectionable, like reducing harm, increasing transparency, and building trust. I know a final report is coming out soon. Can one of you speak to what we might see in this final report and whether you think it's going to make a difference?
Well, I'll take the lead on that, and also do my best to not bury or not to step upon the rollout that's happening next week. But what folks can
we won't tell anybody. You go ahead. Go ahead.
No, just whisper it across here, right? What folks can really expect to see is a set of recommendations across each of those areas of reducing harm, increasing transparency, right, and building trust that really dig into clear recommendations. Some of them are rooted in what the platforms can be doing as it relates to transparency. Some of it is very connected to government and also around issues of not just transparency, but around Section 230 and some amendments to that. And then, as we sort of really dug in, we also wanted to look at sort of all of the ways in which the stories of these countries, the story of across the world that gets told in ways that I think decreases our ability to work together. So, focuses on what can we do to elevate truth.
As we really wrestled with these recommendations with folks that came from very different backgrounds and different perspectives, we tried to hone in on things that we felt could be actionable. Actionable both over the next several months and actionable over the next couple of years. What really defined so much of what we looked at and really dug into was the absolute need for clear leadership. One of the challenges that we have, whether it is in Silicon Valley or whether it is in the halls of Congress and at the White House and powerful places, is that we don't have enough clear-eyed, focused leadership willing to actually do the things that are going to be tough. I mentioned Frederick Douglass earlier, and he has this quote that there is no progress without struggle. Those who deprecate freedom, those who want freedom but deprecate agitation want fields without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. And part of, I think, what we're wrestling with and what we wrestled with as a commission was how could we dig into some of the clear areas. Harry mentioned the super spreaders. And there will be kind of recommendations across these areas that actually try to get at places that can be force multipliers for real change. I don't think one report in and of itself will change the conversation alone. And part of what the work of panels like this, conversations like this, those of you who are all watching, people who join in efforts to push back, and those who will read the report and the media that will cover it, we will always lose the opportunity to create real change in the back rooms if the people are not lined up at the front door. And so the goal of this report, from my perspective, is to get more people invested in the work of creating real change, getting more people willing to lean in and push to fight back against what is happening at the platforms in action to deal with it from our government. Because in order to actually deal with a crisis as big as information disorder, we're going to need all of us to participate, all of us to engage, and all of us to hold the sort of people and places and institutions that we associate with accountable.
So here's picking on that, a question comes in from AO London that I was going to ask myself. What incentives or pressure do you think will actually take for social media platforms to make substantive moves to combat the spread of misinformation?
Who's that for?
So. The,
I'm throwing the ball up in the air. Renee or Harry, you want to take that?
Sure. I think one of the questions is we've seen from the whistleblower documents that have also come out this it's not that we don't know these things. It's not that there's not internal research being done. It's that there's no impetus from the top to make the necessary changes to act on the findings to mitigate the harms. And in some ways, public pressure goes a reasonable distance, right, towards compelling action. And there's regulatory efforts where Congress can step up and act, and we see bill after bill after bill being introduced. But another group of people that does have a substantial amount of power are tech workers and employees at these companies who have the power to agitate from the inside and to either serve as whistleblowers or to walk out or to try to prevail upon their managers to take action on the things that they're talking about. And I think that's where we need to be right now.
Here's another question from Anna, in San Francisco. And I was thinking this, Rashad, when you complained that, Facebook was an unregulated company. And I come from an unregulated industry, essentially, the media. Some people think that Facebook is a media platform, and I really don't think we should be regulated by the government. Anna asks, no one wants censorship. We want to be free to criticize, especially those in power online. What's the balanced approach to allow people their free speech and, for a private company which is allowed to present whatever content it wants that, is legal, including, I guess, categories of speech which we're all concerned about, which is harmful but legal. Harry, maybe have you thought about that?
Well, I think, the free speech argument is somewhat a distraction from the main problem. That's certainly what I've noticed over the last 6 months. But the free speech argument is somewhat a distraction from the main problem. That's certainly what I've noticed over the last. The free speech argument is somewhat a distraction from the main problem. That's certainly what I've noticed over the last 6 months. But as we've already established, this isn't just a social media problem; it's a media problem. I've grown up learning that news should be sacred ground. And you don't have to be Logan Roy or Rupert Murdoch to understand that clickbait is the descendant of targeted advertising. Have you ever noticed that the truth is paywalled, but the lies are free, right? So when a lie spreads on social media, it's dangerous. Of course it is. But when that same lie is given credibility by journalists or publishers, it's unethical and, as far as I'm concerned, an abuse of power. If the media, news media, is supposed to be holding us to account, who is holding them to account? Because it's kind of become like a bit of a digital dictatorship. And from my perspective, looking for the solutions, I really feel as though we have to invest in and support professional, honest journalists who respect and uphold the values of journalism, not the pirates with the press cards, who have hijacked the most powerful industry, the freest industry in the world. Real journalists have the power and the will to tackle racism, misogyny, lies, all of it from within their own system. So what I would love to see is a movement for journalists to expose the unethical, the immoral, and dishonest amongst them. But look, Stephen, from my perspective, we can fix this. We have to fix this, but we need everyone's help. Everyone knows that we can do better. They can do better. The platforms especially can do better. But this isn't about telling people to stop using the platforms. I actually think that would be impossible given how addictive they are. But it's about being aware enough to be able to protect yourself from the harms and know when you are being used.
And I want to push back against this. I want to push back against this idea that you're not regulated. You actually are not immune to actually being accountable to civil rights law, for instance. And you are not immune if you print and you amplify and move things that are deeply untrue, and you're not immune from consequences. And so the sort of level of immunity that platforms have is quite different than media. And having been back and forth with these companies where they have said upfront that they are not media, and have made it clear that they're not media, the money and the paid advertisement and the money that can be put behind the kind of targeted approach to move content, the surveillance data mining, all makes these companies very different than media. And freedom of speech is not freedom from the consequences of speech. And I think we have to sort of remember that, and remember that as much as we absolutely, and as much as a civil rights leader, I want to defend the ability for us to express our will for a better future through civil rights. I also don't think my civil rights should be valued so that companies in Silicon Valley can make more money.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that the press should, and any outlet should take responsibility for what they write. I just get a little nervous when I hear about people saying, all due respect, Harry, that who's a journalist and who's not. But I want to ask this before we go. Are you folks optimistic about this? We've been, grappling with this for a long time. What seems to be happening in some respects is that as things go on, the propaganda is being democratized. It's easier to figure out how to spread the misinformation and or not moving things along. Though it is, as we mentioned here, we're talking about it now. I want to ask each of you, are you optimistic? Are we moving in the right direction, or have we gotten hold of at least the tools to move ourselves in the right direction? Renee, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure, I think we're moving in the right direction. I don't know that I'm necessarily optimistic. Look, there have been, you alluded to propaganda again, so I'll use that as an example. With every major technological innovation in communication, there was an explosion and a kind of transmutation of what propaganda looked like, what form it took, who had the power to spread it, the mechanism by which it spread. I think that we are in the near term of that sort of last major technological upheaval being social media, which democratized propaganda, made it this propaganda of amplification, as Prince Harry alluded to with the super spreaders dynamic. Now that we have had about 7 years of research from outsiders, now leaks from platform companies, we are seeing innovation on policy, education, and design, sort of the three frontiers by which we can make a difference. There's varying time horizons, I would argue. In the short term, I am concerned. I am concerned about particularly elections. I'm concerned about public health. More than that, I'm concerned about people continuing to believe that the normal way to engage online, the healthy way to engage online, is to participate in the propaganda of amplification and amplifying whatever the most outrageous thing in their feed is. And so I do believe that in the near term, we really need to be doing the hard work of engaging with communities and engaging with individuals on just the behavior, the way that we interact on these systems.
So in other words, training people on what they can say, what they can share, and how to act.
While at the same time looking to the medium and the long term with some of the findings that are going to come out from the commission, advising governments and platforms and creating a system of responsible regulation.
Advising governments and platforms and creating a system of responsible regulation.
To think through what the systemic overhaul looks like over the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Rashad, optimistic?
I'm a racial justice leader, so I wake up every day believing that change is possible. And there's no way that you can do this work and not believe that change is possible. And if you think about all of the things that have been changed in this country because people came together, they built strategies, and they focused to topple systems that seemed untoppable. I absolutely believe that change is possible, and that is why we need more people invested, engaged. Every week it feels like I am getting another call from a journalist reading me in on a secret document from one of these companies. And so to the point that Renee made about the important role that folks inside of these companies play in the sort of role and the character they want to be in the story 5, 10, 15 years from now, when the story of this moment is told, and what archetype do they want to be in this story? But the story of each and every one of us, of how we engage, how we work together, I am absolutely optimistic that change is possible. What I want to focus us all into is that even when things change, they don't necessarily change for all of us.
So we don't want to think about trickle-down solutions to these problems, but want to recognize that the harms that face some of the people oftentimes left out of these conversations will determine whether or not we as a society actually truly valued real change, or we valued something that was cosmetic. I think the opportunity before us is there for real structural change, and I hope that we all sort of take this opportunity to do that, even in the face of so many barriers.
Okay, and Harry, I'll give you the last word. Are you looking forward to a better situation?
Yes, I think we have to. I think optimistic, yes, but I'm equally worried. So, my ask today is to the talented employees of our media ecosystem, right? As far as I know, executives don't build product, engineers do. Publishers don't report stories, journalists do. And I strongly, strongly believe that collectively as human beings, we have the talent and conviction to make change within the systems that we operate. Change that every single person will be proud to be associated with. People now more than ever want and need truth. They want and need trust, and they want and need transparency. We're here to support them in any way possible. As the others referred to, there's a lot of whistleblowing. There's a lot of really damaging articles and facts that are coming out about these companies, but yet the change is not happening. Again, advertisers, another call out to them that pay for these views. Please know where your money is going and stop funding hate and lies. And the optimism really comes from me being able to, after the last 6 months of being surrounded by experts in the field from all walks of life, really being able to imagine the real genuine good that can come from removing the harm, because everyone benefits. This isn't about pulling the plug. This is about literally cleaning it up so everyone can come to work, can come to these communities online and off, and be welcomed no matter who they are, what they represent, and what their beliefs are. But we need to have a shared reality.
Well, on that note, that I want to thank you all for a tremendous discussion. I hope our discussion at least helped something. We got some real information, not misinformation, from this, and thank you all.
As we close out this video, I would like to remind everybody that the day that Harry did this interview with Wired was the day that Meghan Markle was exposed for lying to the court. This was the day that everybody found out that Meghan and Harry did indeed collaborate with Omid Scobie on Finding Freedom. What people don't realize is that Meghan and Harry had heavily suppressed this news here in the United States, so it didn't get much coverage. But I thought to bring it up to remind everybody of what liars and hypocrites Harry and Meghan are. And because there were channels like mine calling them out on this, we ended up getting canceled. So fuck you, Harry, for calling the First Amendment a distraction. Wait till you see how distracting the First Amendment's going to be for you, Harry, when more Americans discover how you've been trying to take away their rights. And on that note, definitely let me know your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Such a fraud.